Good afternoon. Welcome back after the short break. Hope you've all had a coffee. My name's Alistair. I'm the MC and track curator for Improve and Innovate. Thank you for coming along to hear Graeme's story, which he'll talk about in a moment. Before that, brief plug for the next talk coming up in this track. So Sam Tardif's talking about the simplification of Confluence, which will be an awesome talk. Some housekeeping as well. If you want to ask Graeme questions, there should be some time at the end. Please go to the app, go to Graeme's session in the agenda, and then click submit a question. And that way I will read those questions out at the end. So hopefully there'll be some time for that. I'll intro Graeme. So funny thing about Graeme, who watches the Wiggles here, or whose kids watch the Wiggles? Anybody? I do. Yes, see Robin. So my daughter loves the Wiggles. Graeme knows all the words to all the Wiggles songs, which is pretty freaking cool. I had to use that one. You gave me 3 stories, I had to use that one. But Graeme's going to talk about how to build what customers want or what customers need, and the story of our growth team at Atlassian, which I'm super excited to hear him talk about. So please welcome to the stage, Graeme Smith.
I'm not going to sing any Wiggles. Can everyone hear me all right? Average? Okay. Okay. So yeah, as Alistair said, I'm in the growth team at Atlassian, and I'm going to go through today how to build what customers want. So being a customer is pretty easy, right? You're there to be served. As a customer, you decide whether something's worth paying for and whether it's not. You know if you've had a good experience, and you know if you've had a bad one. So I'm going to give a couple of examples now of where I've been a customer. Let's talk quickly about airline travel. So I've got 2 beautiful sons there. They have less beautiful moments when we're all on a plane together. And you can see my wife is helping them negotiate who gets which toy. When they're less than 2 years old, you don't need to buy a ticket for them to go on the flight with the expectation that they can just sit on your lap. Now, it saves you a lot of money, but it is an ambitious undertaking. And as you can see, it can get pretty cramped. There are times where I'll come out of those flights feeling a little bit cranky and quite exhausted. We have been lucky on a couple of occasions, though, to have a spare seat next to us. In fact, there was one time we were waiting around at the gate and my name got called over the PA system. Now, this is not usually a good sign, but in this case, it actually was. So I went over to the desk and they explained that because we had kids, they'd found us a new spot on the plane with a spare seat. It was amazing. Right? This sort of thing can make all the difference. There was going to be a spare seat somewhere on the plane, and they decided to put it next to us. In this case, the airline really understood what I needed here. A bit of extra space in a pretty challenging period. And they did something that made my flight, and probably everyone else's, better. I came out of that flight feeling a bit more relaxed. Speaking of relaxed, we recently went on a family holiday to Fiji. It's a really beautiful place, and you can see my son Noah there, really just loving life on this tropical island. So we get to the hotel and they take us to our room. It's a nicely decked out room with a beautiful view of the ocean. But there was just one problem. The railing on the balcony was quite easy to climb. Now, this is not the sort of thing that I'm really inclined to climb over, but that cheeky monkey certainly would. In fact, within a couple of minutes, both of my boys had tried to climb over the railing, not understanding that there was a drop on the other side. I know this is an extreme exaggeration, but I think you get my point. This was not going to cut it. I mean, it's pretty hard to enjoy a beautiful view of the sunset when you've constantly got one eye on your kids, making sure that they're not going to seriously hurt themselves. I think the hotel here had really good intentions. You know, it was a nice room, it had a great view. It just wasn't the right room for us. As a parent, you know, a beautiful view is nothing compared to making sure my kids are safe. So it just wasn't the right room. What you can take away from these stories is that small things can make a difference, and it may not be obvious what those things are. When you're building software for customers, it can be even harder because you may not have direct contact with many or all of your customers. So there are many improvements that you can make in your product, right? And I bet most of you even have a short list in your head. If only you had time to get through all those things on the list. So you need to prioritize, and that can be really tough. You may go and build your customer a balcony, only to realize that they can't use it for some reason. Or it may not be that drastic. You may just build them something that they're actually quite indifferent to, which is a waste of your time and gets in the way of that other thing they were trying to do. So here's the sad reality. most changes won't make a difference. You think we'd know better, but our intuition is often wrong. And it's not because the ideas are bad or because the designers or developers don't know what they're doing. It's because of this. Success equals desire minus friction. This quote comes from Sean Ellis, and it really resonates with me. If people want something enough, they'll put up with some pain. But too much friction, and it'll stand in the way of things. So going to the airline example, right? My desire to save money was greater than the challenge of nursing a child through the flight. For another example, think about mobile phone games like Pokemon Go. It's okay, I'm not going to ask anyone to own up to actually playing this game, but there are millions of people out there who do play it. When the servers go down, people lose their minds, but it doesn't turn them away from actually wanting to play the game. It has a massive battery drain on the phone as well, but again, it doesn't turn people away from it. In fact, people go out and buy a spare battery pack just so they can play the game. So this really confronts the notion that you actually have to fix everything in your product. The strength of the desire will help determine which friction is actually worth removing. Sometimes, though, it doesn't matter how good your product is. There are lots of ways that it can go unused. People may not have confidence in it, or there may be something confusing about it, or just some reason which they can't use it. So going back to the hotel in Fiji, I like a beautiful view of the ocean, but that was way less than the stress of keeping my kids safe through that experience. And sometimes even small amounts of friction can overwhelm desire. Think about the number of times you've gone up to sign up for a new service, but you've abandoned it halfway through because they've asked for a piece of information that you weren't particularly happy giving, or they didn't support the payment method that you wanted to use. It can happen really easily, and it happens a lot. So there are two principles that you can use to tackle this head on. As we said earlier, I work in Atlassian's growth team, and we use these two principles every day. The first is to try lots of ideas. So we know that our intuition is often wrong, and that most changes won't make a difference. We overcome this by trying a wide variety of ideas at high volume. For example, in Jira, we found that we tried 14 different places where we wanted to see if you could invite your teammates, right, to let you know that they could bring them in. 14 different places before we found the one place that customers actually engaged with. Sometimes you just have to be persistent, and it may not be obvious up front what that is. Now, when you're trying lots of ideas, you need to measure the impact of those changes. So when you do find something that actually makes a difference, you've got confidence that you're adding value to your customers. It moves the discussion out of the meeting rooms and into the real world where the customers are. So I'm going to run you through how my team operates with these two principles, and then I'm going to dive into some specific things that you can try around these areas. Before we get started, there's two things that you'll need to have in place. The first is analytics. So this lets you see how people are interacting with your product, and it's the mechanism for gauging that measurement of change. The second is A/B testing, also called experimentation. So this is how you try out a new idea and see if one thing is better than the other. It is the gold standard for testing new changes. Now, there are lots of different services that you can use for these. At Atlassian, we hand roll some and we rent services as well. The details aren't especially important. What is important is the approach you use with these two things in place. Now, just quickly, so we're on the same page, I'm going to run through what an A/B test or an experiment is. You start with your control group. That's the current thing that's live for all of your customers. You introduce a variation, which is the thing that you're actually looking to test, the change you're trying to test. You randomly show this to two groups of your customers, and then you're measuring some sort of key metric there. So it might be number of sign-ups or number of people invited, or even something like the time to create the first project. And what you're doing there is looking for a measurable difference between those two things. Now, there is some science involved here, and I'm not going to dive into that today. I could spend a whole talk just on that. If you have an analyst, they'll take care of this for you. Otherwise, third-party tooling can help you out here. So, looking at how my team operates with these two principles in mind. The first thing we do is get a picture of what our customers are like by doing some research and taking those into lessons and insights. We use this to generate lots of ideas around things we can try to improve our products. We execute them, working really quickly, taking the learnings and feeding them back into the loop. So let's look at research and lessons first. There are many places where customers will tell you, either directly or indirectly, if they're giving you what you want. So let's look at qualitative information first. This is where you're getting a fairly direct insight into what the customer is thinking and feeling. You've got your fairly direct lines of communication. At Atlassian, for example, we have staff that people can contact at various points to get help with using our products. We also have a public issue tracker, jira.atlassian.com, where people can come in and they can raise bugs and feature requests and vote on them. We also conduct customer interviews, so we talk directly with people who are using our products to understand how they're using them. And we conduct user testing, where we look at a specific thing we're trying to do and get people's gauge on how they like it or not. On the other side of the coin, you've got quantitative sources of information. So these are the hard numbers, like your usage analytics. You can look at how people are using your features. Are they using them very often? Are they dropping off midway through a flow? And you've also got your experiment results. So I know it can be quite daunting to try to consume all of this information, but I really encourage you to stick with it. The more sources you pull from, the more complete of a picture you'll get of your customers. Okay, so now let's look at generating ideas. A great way to start is with a structured brainstorming session. This is where you're essentially getting a bunch of people in a room with the intent of generating a lot of ideas. The way we usually do it at Atlassian is we'll form pairs or small groups and we write down our ideas on post-it notes. We then stick them on the wall, we group together the ones that are duplicated, pitch the ideas back to the rest of the group and vote on the ones that we think we should keep. So this is something that we're actually currently iterating with. It's a process that we're currently fine-tuning. So some tips around running these brainstorming sessions. Have your research done up front. This really helps frame the problems and helps you spend weight on the biggest opportunities. Another thing I found to be really beneficial is to invite people in outside your own team. Right? It's very easy to stay insulated in this, but if you bring in, say, a developer, a designer, a product manager, anyone really who's working in the area that you're generating ideas around, they're going to increase the diversity of your ideas, they're going to bring with them their product knowledge, and they're also going to give feedback to the other ideas generated in the group. Most importantly as well, when you do have an experiment that comes out with a result, anyone there is more invested in it, and it helps you spread that knowledge and culture around the organization. So you usually come up with way more ideas than you can actually run. And so what you need to do is prioritize. There's a few ways you can do this. A common way is to use a mathematical algorithm like ICE, where you score each idea on the impact, confidence, and ease of running it. Now, we tend to chop and change and use a variety of methods here. There's no hard and fast rule. Other things we'll often look at is how long is the experiment going to take to run? This will affect things like your scheduling and throughput of ideas. Also, what's the value of the lesson? Sometimes this can really help drive important business decisions. So moving on to look at executing ideas. This is where a growth team really thrives because we build quickly. This is very intentional in the way that we work. We work in a really fast feedback loop because we want to quickly find those ideas that do work and not spend time on things that don't. Now, it's not about getting this much work done in this much time. It's about figuring out how to get to here, that same level of learning, by doing this much work. So what we'll often do is build things as prototypes, and they only live for a short period of time and they can be thrown away afterwards if they don't work. We take lots of sensible shortcuts as well. So we might target certain browsers or certain customer profiles. We run the ideas as A/B tests or experiments and we measure their impact. We then take what we've learned and feed it back into the loop. Now, it's important here to still value the experiments that don't work. It may not feel like it, but that's actually a really valuable lesson, knowing that something didn't move the needle. If you're interested in learning more about this particular area, I suggest checking out Claire Maynard's talk tomorrow. It's called 6 Strategies to Uncover Growth Opportunities for Your Business. Now, this is an objection that I hear quite commonly around this way of working. I know something is better, we should just ship it. And sometimes that's actually a really fair point. Although I would add, it's great to still measure it, to validate whether your intuition is right. Since we know that our intuition can be wrong, it'll really surprise us when it happens. A couple of years ago in HipChat, we built out a new web client. And at the time, some of the folks in the HipChat team, they were not particularly happy with the onboarding flow that you got when you landed in the product for the first time. So they took this new release as an opportunity to build something new. I'm sure you can guess what happened, right? They bundled up the changes, they tested against the old web client, and it actually performed worse. So we had to take a step back and say, you know what? The only change we'll test is the new web client. We'll put the old onboarding flow in the new web client. And it performed tremendously better. So it's a good thing we didn't just ship what we thought was going to be best, because we actually would have been shooting ourselves in the foot there. Now, I'm going to go through 3 types of experiments that you can run at your organization to help find those things that will actually add value for your customers. The first is research. So here, you're looking to get feedback directly from the customer to find points of friction to address in future experiments. In exploration, you're going really broad, trying a wide variety of ideas and new concepts, trying to find the areas that are actually worth spending more time on. And then with optimization, you're going deeper, fine-tuning the ideas that have been proven to be worthwhile. So I'll go through each of these in turn with some examples, starting with research. So in this one, we engaged with people on the HipChat sign-up form. And what we did was we used a service called Qualaroo, which lets you integrate targeted surveys into your website. Using some smarts in the survey, when it looked like people were about to leave the sign-up form, we popped up a little survey. What we asked them was if there was anything that was stopping them from signing up. This is a great way to find out these points of friction. And opening up to a free text answer means people can give you their exact reasons why. It also means, though, that you'll get a lot of rubbish responses, so there's a bit of post-processing to do in the analysis. From this survey, we found out that some people were a bit tentative as we hadn't called out the pricing on the home page and sign-up form. There were others who were unsure if their company actually already had an account that they should be using. It's important to remember as well that the people who respond to your survey may not be an accurate representation of the rest of the people, so you need to bear that in mind. Now, there's a lot of great questions you can ask in research experiments around this type of area. One is, where did you find out about us? So this helps you fine-tune your marketing channels, right? Some of the marketing channels are actually very detached from someone landing on your website. So by asking this question, you can connect the dots, which then allows you to find the channels that are working well and double down on them. Now, when you run a question that has a list of canned responses, you want to make sure you do randomize it. You want to avoid that bias to people just selecting the first thing in the list. Another question is there something you can't find? So this helps you make sure that the information you're including on your website is actually addressing the questions that people have when they come there to decide whether this is a service they want or not. This question comes from Qualaroo's 6 golden questions, and I really like this one. What almost stopped you from signing up? So one of the things that can be really tough in trying to answer why people aren't signing up is when someone's already made the decision not to sign up, they're not very interested in talking to you. So by engaging with the people who did make it through, you can infer some reasons why others didn't. Now, if you're going to ask these kind of surveys using research experiments in product, you need to do it a bit differently. You need to bear in mind that people may be paying for this product, they're doing a job, they're trying to get something done. So you need to make sure you don't get in the way and actually offer them something valuable. In this case, we popped up a little thing there saying, "Hi, I'm Aaron, I'm a product advocate at Atlassian." And what he was doing was offering the chance to help people learn how to use the product. Now, what we found here was that engagement rate was actually quite low. Not many people responded to this survey. And the people who did were actually already quite engaged and invested in using the product. But there is somewhat of a halo effect here. Just by having this there, knowing that you can talk to someone helpful can increase conversion rates because it provides reassurance. In this example, when a new user landed on Jira, we presented them with a search box, asking them what they wanted to do. Whatever they typed in, we matched it with the best guess links to in the product. What we also did was record that information so we could get an idea of what people were actually trying to do when they told us directly. Now, a really important thing to remember here is that we don't want to capture any sensitive information. So what we did in this case was pass all of the inputs through a filter of allowed words, words that we knew were safe to capture. Anything that wasn't on the list was discarded. So what we knew we kept was totally safe. This is the Net Promoter Score dialogue that shows up in most of our products. What it asks people is how likely they are to recommend this product to someone else. It gives us a great pulse for customer sentiment. And there's also a free text response there. We use that information to help find the biggest areas where we can address, like it might be performance, complexity, or a certain missing feature. If you're interested in knowing more about what we do with this information, I recommend checking out Sean Kramer's lightning talk tomorrow, called How Your Insights Are Affecting Change in 2017. Now, this is now a permanent fixture, but the way that we got there was via experimentation. We had to make sure that we were asking the question in the right way, so we're minimizing disruption and maximizing the quality of our responses. And this is an area we still continue to iterate on. So let's look at where research experiments work really well. They're great at discovering things you weren't looking for. By asking customers questions, they can tell you things you may not have known existed. It also helps you understand how users feel about something. So seeing the metrics move in the right direction is usually a good sign, but there may be something else going on there. I know there's been plenty of times I've used a service, even paid for it, but I've certainly not been happy about it. And it's not without its challenges. You need to avoid interrupting users. As I said earlier, people may be trying to get a job done, they may be paying for your service, and the mere act of bugging them with questions can actually turn them away. Now, one way you can check for this is actually running these experiments against a control group so you can check for those detrimental effects. There's a lot of psychology as well behind interpreting the answers. We are, after all, human, which means that we are susceptible to a bunch of cognitive biases. And we need to make sure that we don't give too much weight to what some people have said when they may not be a representation of the rest of our customers. So if you're looking to make this happen at your organization, one thing I recommend you do is think about what insights you need for an upcoming feature. By planning early and running these research experiments, it gives you time to prepare and adapt if you need to make sure that you are actually going to work on the most impactful thing. Also, sharing the insights and stories is really valuable. I find that these stories are actually quite contagious, and once you share them around, there'll be an appetite for more. It'll generate more research experiments in your organization. Okay, so moving on to exploration-style experiments. So this is where we're going really broad. We're looking to break down those assumptions and challenge our intuition so we can explore and find those new areas that might be worth pursuing. In this example, we offered people the opportunity to import contacts from common sources. This has worked out really well for some other companies. So what we did was we put it in a prominent place in user management, and we actually had an onboarding flow for new users to direct them towards this page. To build the prototype, I used a service which was built out in an iframe, but it used OAuth, so it was credible, and we were able to use our own CSS to make it look like part of our product. I know it's not the most polished flow, but it was enough to put it there in front of customers to see if they actually wanted to use it. Let's get some audience participation going here. I know it's been a big day. Can I get everyone to stand up really quickly? All right, what we're going to do is play a game of heads and tails. So put your hands on your head if you think Google was the most popular choice, and hands on tail if you think it was something else. Okay, anyone with your hand on your head, you are correct. All right, looks like that was about 50-50. All right, everyone stay standing though. That one was a little bit easy. The next one, hands on heads if you think 5% or more of people imported their teammates via Google, and hands on tails if you think it was less than 5%. All right, looks like mostly people have gone with tails. And you would be correct, 0.5%, an absolutely abysmal number. You can all sit down now, thanks for that. So this was certainly not the right way to build this feature. And it's a good thing we didn't just go and build it for real. The prototype took me 2 weeks to build, but imagine how long it would have taken to build this properly in product. Most of the other options besides Google didn't even get a single click. So moving on to the next example. When you sign up for HipChat, you can create a group. And this is basically your organization's private area where you can invite people in and create rooms that no one else can see. What we noticed was that a lot of people were creating new groups, but they weren't really doing anything in there. They weren't inviting teammates in, they weren't creating rooms, they weren't even really clicking around. And then on the sign-up form, we noticed there were lots of errors around the subdomain field. So that's where you get to choose something.hipchat.com. So what we suspected may have been happening was that people were actually signing up for a new group when they didn't mean to. We thought we'd put it to the test with a quick experiment. So we put this split in the sign-up flow, asking very directly, are you trying to create a new group or join an existing one? When they elected that they wanted to join an existing one, we just took them to a static page. Since we didn't know how big this problem was, we didn't want to go too far with it. What it told them was that they should go and talk to their admin about it. Not the most amazing flow, I know, but still arguably better than letting them go and create a new group when they didn't mean to. We actually found that 1/4 of users went down this path, so we knew it was definitely something worth investing more time in. We then went and built a more polished flow, gathering information from the user, then we could send off a notification to the admin. We knew we could do this because there was enough people going down this flow. When we ran this, we saw a decrease in sign-up rate, which was actually a good thing in this case because we had less people signing up when it wasn't what they intended to do. More importantly, we had a tremendous increase in users joining new groups. In the next example, we tried out something called Jira Intro Mode. So as many of you know, Jira is an incredibly powerful product, but it can be quite daunting to a new user. So we put this option in the header where they could turn intro mode on and off. Let me show you how it works. One more time, just in case you missed it. So we removed a lot of functionality in this mode. And what we were looking to do was see if a simpler UI resonated better with new users. Now, in this case, it didn't move conversion rate, but we did see more sustained use. 30% of people still using it after 5 days. We weren't planning on shipping this feature, but it gave us a good indication that this was an area worth pursuing. So let's look at where exploration works really well. It blows up your thinking. It really facilitates innovation. Rather than thinking about the steps along each customer journey, you're able to throw that away and imagine a completely new one. It also helps you find things that are not worth building. Think about the import contacts example here. Finding out that that was not working was a tremendous win, as we didn't go off and build something that was going to be a waste of time, which also freed up our time to go and explore other things. So looking at the challenges of exploration experiments. This will be really unnatural, but you need to strip the idea back to its core. I know there's a lot of temptation to just pile as much as possible into one idea, but there's no point spending longer on something when you don't actually know if it's going to work yet. By shipping earlier, you learn earlier. So you want these kind of experiments to act as a metal detector, fishing around to see what areas are worth improving on. Now you have to combine that though with maintaining a quality bar. There's still a good user experience that you need to deliver. For example, when I was looking at the service to use for importing contacts, I had to make sure that that actually stood up to what customers would expect from an Atlassian product. It's also really easy to stick to the comfortable, safe ideas. Sometimes you need to force yourself to go with the totally big, scary ideas. What you'll see is that these will usually give you the most interesting results. So, if you're looking to make this happen at your organization, one thing I recommend doing is talking with designers and product managers. They're the ones who are usually thinking a bit further into the future. Ask them if there's something that they'd love to see in the product that they know won't happen for at least 6 months. Build it out as a prototype and ship it for them. And watch the reward they get from seeing this thing actually reach fruition. They'll get the results from the experiment and it'll help feed into the decision making to know what to work on next. Also, challenge the work that's currently going on. See if there's a way that we can run an experiment now to validate if this is actually a good idea. Just because we've sunk the cost doesn't mean we should continue with it. Another thing you can do is retrospectively look at how you got there and think, could there have been other things we could have tried to validate that this was actually worth spending time on? Okay, moving on to optimization experiments. So we've run our exploration, we've found the areas that are worth pursuing, and we dive deeper, fine-tuning these ideas. This is the shopping cart on Atlassian.com. It used to be part of the main sign-up flow. A lot of flexibility, you can decide which products you want to add, but with that comes a lot of confusion and chance for distraction. So instead, we tried to simplify the choice, giving you pre-packaged bundles. Now you might think this looks like a really big change, but in this case, we built it as a prototype using JavaScript injection, and it really wasn't. It was mostly cosmetic, took us 2 days to build. The idea turned out to be successful. 52% increase in products signed up for, and most importantly as well, an increase in purchases. This is immediate, tangible value we added to the business that was very easy to act on. In the next example, we were addressing the problem of people being invited into Confluence and then never logging in. So we decided to send an email after 48 hours reminding someone to say, hey, you can come and join your team on Confluence. Now there is a number of ways you could go about building a feature like this. Because we didn't know if it was going to work or not, we kept it really lean. We wrote a script to query the analytics to look for people who had been invited but not logged in. We ran this once a day and manually triggered an email. In this case, it turned out to give us an 18% increase in people logging in. So we decided that was worthwhile keeping. We went out, spent the time to build a production service and made it a permanent fixture. The Jira sidebar was a massive undertaking. A lot of design and research went into deciding that this was a feature we did want to have in Jira. Now with a big feature like this, also comes a lot of scope to manage. And I assure you, we didn't land on this design first go. Let me show you how we got there. We started by building the sidebar behind a feature flag. So a feature flag lets you turn on functionality for some customers and leave it off for the remainder. We quickly built out a minimum viable product, which means it had just enough functionality for customers to actually use. We selected a small amount of customers at random and allowed them to opt in to try out this new sidebar. So what we looked at there was the opt-in and opt-out rates to see if people were actually finding the feature useful after using it. We looked at the usage analytics to see which parts of the sidebar people were using and how often. And we also had a research element to there, a give feedback button down there, which really helped complete the picture. Now this shaped the next few weeks of development. And we continued to iterate, sending out small releases, bringing in new customers as we went. And each release was an improvement upon the last until we ended up with something that we're actually happy to give to all of our customers. Now, some of you might be thinking this sounds a bit slower, but I assure you it's not. Because as I said earlier, the faster you ship, the faster you learn. So by taking this approach, you actually end up faster to get to that value that the customers will actually appreciate. We didn't take this approach when we built the Confluence sidebar sometime earlier. The lesson we learned there was that shipping is not the same as success. Just by shipping something doesn't mean your job's done if people aren't using parts of it as expected. So this is something we're addressing now. And if you'd like to learn more about that, I recommend checking out Sam Tardif's talk, which is actually straight after this one in the same track. So let's look at where optimization works really well. It's great at removing friction. So you have a customer journey, and each point there is a decision point. Some people will make it through, and others won't. So by using the analytics, you can target those points of drop-off that are most important and tackle them with optimization experiments. It also helps you refine features before everyone sees them, but not before anyone sees them. If you're not doing this, you're effectively experimenting with 100% of your customers 100% of the time. So the point we're aiming to reach at Atlassian is where every change that goes out is measured in some way. This really forces you to think outwards towards the customer. Is this change going to add value to my customers? And how would I go about measuring that? So looking at the challenges. After you run a successful experiment, you get the result and there will be a temptation to make changes afterwards. If you've built it as a prototype, there may be that temptation to fine-tune it and run another experiment as a prototype. I know I've been tempted to do this many times. And in every case, it ended up being a bad idea. Hindsight's really awesome like that. What happens is you end up running that second experiment to see if it's measurably better than the first. The most likely scenario is that it's not. The biggest bang for buck was in that first gain you had in the first experiment, and trying to move the needle even further is really hard. The best thing you can do is cash in on the win straight away, ship it in product, and then that becomes a new baseline to beat. Just because you've shipped it doesn't mean you should be done experimenting around that area. You can continue with more experiments. Experiments are inherently fast to build. That's very intentional in the way we build them. So when it comes time to actually shipping something for real in product, you have to deal with all sorts of other things, like the maintainability of the code or the longevity of the feature, edge cases across your entire customer base. It can be really hard to reconcile that something which took 1 week to build as a prototype is going to take months to build as a feature. You do need to weigh up that cost and make sure that the development cost of building it for real is actually worthwhile compared to the gains you saw in the experiment. So, if you're looking to make this happen at your organization, one thing that I did when I was a developer in the team was I shopped myself around to all the other developers at Atlassian. I offered up my time to sit down and pair with them. I could get their dev environment set up to start writing experiments. I could show them the ins and outs and really frame their thinking around fast prototyping. This can be a really unnatural thing for some people to get over. What we could do then was get them invested in the results, encourage them to build things behind feature flags, and help them learn this way of measuring the changes that they're shipping. It ended up being really fruitful. You can also find the features that aren't used. If a feature isn't being used, you should arguably pull it out of the product. It's serving no purpose being there. You can then do a retrospective on how it ended up being in the product. What decisions were made that led it to be there? We need to assume that at the time, we were using the best information at hand. You now have a lot more tactics to bring to that sort of discussion. So to recap, 3 types of experiments. We've got research, where we're getting feedback directly from our customers to find points of friction to address in future experiments. Exploration, where we're going really broad, challenging our assumptions, breaking down that fact that our intuition is often wrong, to find those areas that are worth going into deeper. Optimization, fine-tuning those ideas in areas where it's been proven to be worthwhile. And remember, it's all done with these two principles in mind. Trying lots of ideas to overcome the fact that your intuition is often wrong and that most changes won't make a difference, and measuring the impact. So when you do find something that moves the needle, you know you are adding value for your customers. Ultimately, it comes back to this formula. Success equals desire minus friction. The way you can add value to your customers is by increasing the desire and also removing those inhibiting points of friction. So the next time you go to build a feature, ask yourself, do I know this is going to add value to my customers? Am I going to give them a spare seat which is just going to make their day? Or am I going to build a balcony with a great view of the ocean that you can't use because it's unsafe for children? The power is in your hands. By running quick experiments and measuring the impact, you can eliminate the guesswork and build what your customers actually want. Thank you.
Hello. Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Graeme. As some of you may have noticed, the app has locked up for questions. Hooray. So I'm going to run the mic. I think there were a couple of questions when I looked earlier, but I can't remember them. If you've got a question for Graeme, please stick your hand up, even if you put it earlier. It's all right.
Thanks for the talk. It's very, very innovative, I think, ideas in there. So we're stuck in an environment where we can't really change production just because of security restrictions and very sensitive applications, very real-time applications. Are there any recommended methods of running these kinds of experiments? Do you recommend pilot testing and so on?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say the first thing you want to do is make sure you've got the analytics in place, right? So knowing the lay of the land is usually a good starting point. The way that we approach experimentation at Atlassian, there's a lot of risk mitigation. So we often ask ourselves when we build it a certain way, what's the worst thing that could go wrong? So I definitely approach it with that frame of mind. We often write things as prototypes because we can circumvent the release process for a product, and we can easily pull it up and down, make changes of our own accord. So that's definitely one of our risk mitigation strategies. You can also build things into the product behind feature flags. And as long as you've got those switches in place where you can pull the plug if necessary, you just want to make sure you've got that easy out if something goes really wrong.
Likewise, I really enjoyed your talk. I was wondering if you could share some thoughts on which strategies to use or how to apply these strategies if we're building a brand new greenfield app as opposed to iterating on an existing app. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm guessing the problem you're going to face there is volume, right? You don't have many customers to test on, so it's hard to run those experiments and try to get any measurable difference. The way I'd start there would be more around the research arm, so looking to talk more directly with people and get their feedback, get their sentiment. I think NPS is a really good quantitative way to get qualitative feedback, where you're asking someone to score something, how likely they are to recommend it. So you can sort of track that over time in a measurable way and see if those numbers are moving or not.
Oh, at the back. You're going to make me run.
Definitely a very interesting talk. I was just wondering, one of the problems that our team seems to have is when we try to do a brainstorming session, a lot of times we come up with a lot of too many disparate ideas, and it becomes a large effort just to reduce the ideas. So I was wondering, what's the ideal size for a brainstorming group? Like we have about 35. So
I definitely say 35 is too big. I mean, I don't think there's a right answer. One thing we do definitely do is break into small groups during brainstorming. It sort of forces you to go off in parallel teams, avoiding groupthink. But another thing you can do to try and work with that disparity is throw in constraints around the ideas you're thinking up. So, for example, say you're looking to redesign a sign-up flow as an arbitrary example. You could throw in the constraint of, I want to wow someone, or I want it to work on mobile, or something like that. And then it sort of forces people to frame their thinking in a certain way. You can also bring in all the research that you have to sort of highlight highlight where the biggest opportunities or the biggest problems are and get people to address that more directly as well.
Yeah, I'll just add to that as well, that I can point you in the direction of a blog post on the Atlassian design Medium account that talks about how to apply those constraints during that brainstorming session. So I'll come and find you afterwards. Is there one last question? We've got about a minute. If there's one more.
Thank you. You talked about test groups and control groups. How do you establish those groups and determine who's in them, how big they are, and then get the product in front of those customers, especially if they're not? It sounds like you're doing it via the cloud.
Yeah, all of our experimentation is in cloud. So it happens randomly. You randomly allocate people into groups. So we actually have a system that does that for us. In terms of the size, the larger the group, the smaller the change you can detect. So it all comes down to what's the smallest amount of change that I'd be happy to detect, and then that sort of determines the number of people you need. Conversely, you can go the other way around and say, well, I am restricted by the number of people I have, so this is the change that I can measure, and you go in knowing that up front.
All right, I think that's us out of time. Thank you so much, Graeme. That was an awesome talk. If anybody does have any other questions and they're a bit shy, then please come up. Graeme will be around for the next 20 minutes. And as he said, Sam Tardif will be talking next on how they simplified Confluence using many of these methodologies as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you.